There are people who don't need to say much to be remembered. Clint Eastwood is one of them. In his 90s, even as his steps have slowed, his eyes still hold a particular kind of light. Cold, alert, and seeming to see right through the noise of the world. On that deeply lined face, people don't just see the marks of time, but quiet, empty spaces. Stories never fully told, pains he never wished to revisit, and moments when silence became the only way to survive. For more than 6 decades, Hollywood has called him the man of few words. Not just because of his sparse dialogue, not just because of the icy stare in Sergio Leone's dust-red West. When Clint appears, people feel like he brings with him an entire private world. A world where words matter less than presence. A world where a man standing alone is enough to fill the frame. But behind that image, behind the worn jacket, the half-burnt cigar, the glance that makes someone instinctively step back, lies a life full of cracks no one sees. Overlapping relationships, arguments that stretched across decades, losses he never publicly acknowledged, and moments that nearly shattered him. Clint Eastwood is strong, but not because he doesn't feel pain. He is strong because he chooses to carry that pain in silence. What makes Clint's story different is not the spotlight. It's the contradiction within. A brilliant legend with a soul full of shadows. A man seen by the whole world, yet deep inside always believing he must stand alone. An actor for whom the weight of fame was never heavier than the fear of being hurt. And that is the central question of this journey. A man who built his entire career on silence. Can he ever hide the cracks in his heart that will never heal? From the wild plains of the West to the quiet moments behind the camera, from the glow of the Oscars to the darker corners of romances dissected by the press. Clint Eastwood's journey is the story of a man who carried within himself 2 worlds. One built from the light of cinema, and another, heavy, muted, smoldering, that only those closest to him could truly sense. And perhaps it is that silence that is his greatest legacy. Not the gunshots in Dirty Harry, not the icy gaze of the man with no name, but the feeling that lingers when the screen goes dark. The sense that behind that laconic man, something has always remained unsaid. His journey begins here, with the silence that became his identity. But to understand it, we must go back in time. To the boy Clint Eastwood of the 1930s. Clint Eastwood was born on May 31st, 1930, on a foggy morning in San Francisco, a city where the sound of waves and ship horns blended together like an omen for a life that would never stand still. When the nurses lifted the baby, they laughed. 11 pounds, unusually large, heavy enough that they gave him the nickname Samson, a name like a prophecy of strength. But as with every mystery in his life, that strength did not lie in muscle. It lay deep within the quiet spaces of the boy from the very beginning. Clint Eastwood was born at the exact moment America was sinking into the Great Depression, when millions of families lost jobs, homes, and faith. His father, Clinton Sr., was a steel worker. His mother, Ruth, was gentle, quiet, and endlessly patient. They didn't have much, but they tried to preserve a small pocket of peace for their 2 children, Clint and his younger sister, Jeanne, amid relentless upheaval. But Clint's childhood was never still. His father's work forced the family to move constantly, from California to Oregon, down to Texas, up to Washington, then back to the West Coast. More than 10 moves before Clint turned 15. Each new house never stayed long enough to become familiar. Each new school made him the outsider, watching groups of kids who had known one another for years like closed worlds. People often say stability is the greatest gift for a child. Clint never had that gift. He grew up amid hurried departures, nights sitting in the back of a truck with a few belongings, and his mother's eyes following his father as he searched for the road through the dark. No place stayed long enough to be called home. No relationship lasted long enough to be called a friendship. There was only the road, long, quiet, always leading to a place no one could be sure of. And it was in those years that Clint realized his father embodied a different kind of silence. A hard, distant, unreachable silence. Clinton Sr. loved his family the way his generation did, working steadily, carrying everything alone, and never speaking of feelings. No morning hugs, no encouraging words when his son stumbled, only a quick glance and a short question. "You okay?" Clint respected his father, but that respect was mixed with a vague fear. Fear of being a bother, fear of failing, fear of revealing something his father wouldn't know how to respond to. There is a memory Clint shared only many years later. One winter night, the family was preparing to move again. His mother packed things in the kitchen, her hands turning purple from the cold. His father stood on the porch, smoking, eyes fixed on the dark field as if speaking to the void. Clint, only 10 years old, stood between them but belonged to neither. He asked, "Mom, are you tired?" Ruth smiled. "We'll be all right." But his father remained so silent that Clint didn't know if the question was even worth asking. That was the first time the boy understood that adults sometimes stay silent, not because they don't see, but because they don't know what to say. And from that moment, he learned sorrow is best kept inside. That distance between a boy constantly chasing new roads and a father who never looked back long enough became the first crack in Clint's soul. A crack not loud, but smoldering, forming the quiet shell he would carry his whole life. By his teenage years, Clint was unusually tall. At 14, he was already over 6'3". Friends teased him as Samson, a gentle giant, but the bigger he grew, the more he withdrew. Inside that strong frame was an introverted boy, soft-spoken, rarely smiling, always standing on the edge of conversations. The loneliness of a child uprooted from his own childhood had become the guardedness of a young man. Clint was not a standout student. He learned slowly, had little interest in schoolwork, struggled to focus, and often escaped to the sports field or the shop room to work with his hands. But if school wasn't for Clint, labor was. From the age of 13, he took any job he could find: pool lifeguard, dishwasher, parking attendant, loader, kitchen hand, boiler stoker. Those jobs not only supported him, but also helped him feel that he existed in a world where everything else was uncertain. Clint grew up among the rumble of truck engines, afternoons standing on the porch waiting for his father to come home, and his mother's gentle reassurance whenever he felt lost. He had no big dreams, no ambitions, and certainly no thoughts of becoming an actor. He only wanted to escape that constrained life, but he had no idea where to go. Then, in 1951, just after he turned 21, the draft notice arrived, putting an end to Clint Eastwood's youth. It was the moment he stepped out of the shifting roads of his childhood and into the adult world, where challenges no longer came from moving houses, but from roaring engines, the sting of cold ocean winds, and an incident that nearly cost him his life. A new chapter was beginning, and this time, silence would no longer be able to protect him. From 1948 to 1951, Clint lived like a drifter. No plans, no goals, no expectations. He worked every job he could find, and each one left a deep mark on his character. In the cold, damp forests of Springfield, Oregon, Clint worked as a lumberjack, a job requiring strength, patience, and more than a little recklessness. Trees crashed down with the heavy groans of rotting wood. His hands went numb inside thick gloves, and there were moments when a slipping saw nearly injured him, all of it showing him that life was never gentle with anyone. It taught him one thing: to survive, you must stay calm even in the moments when everything feels one nudge away from collapsing. When he wasn't in the forest, Clint worked as a lifeguard after earning his swimming certification. The job sounded easy, but carried a distinct loneliness. Standing for hours watching the gray sea, listening to the waves, scanning the silhouettes of swimmers in the distant expanse. There, he learned how to observe, silently, steadily, cautiously, qualities that would later become the language of his acting. Then came the days fixing engines, the nights playing ragtime piano in Oakland bars. Amid the chaotic music, hammering and rumbling machines, Clint forged an extreme self-reliance. He lived by one rule: do it yourself, live by yourself, bear it yourself. He asked for no help, spoke of no hardship, complained about nothing. Those years weren't the wild youth of a reckless man. They were the youth of someone still trying to understand who he was, where he belonged, and whether he was strong enough to withstand the world. In 1951, when Clint Eastwood received his draft notice, he carried no grand ideals, not because he didn't love his country, but because the 21-year-old still held within himself so many unnamed feelings. The lingering dislocation of childhood, the early years of constant moves leaving hollow footprints across the map of America, and a relationship with his father that forced him to tell himself to be strong. To Clint, the military felt like an escape, a place where he would no longer have to ask, "How long will I stay here?" But fate often arrives when one is unprepared. In September 1951, while traveling from Seattle back to the San Francisco Bay Area on a Douglas AD-1 military aircraft, the engine malfunctioned. The plane lost altitude, swayed violently, then plunged into the sea near Point Reyes amid the roar of the wind and the stench of leaking fuel. Clint, just a passenger, was thrown toward the rear compartment. Water rushed in, cold as knives cutting into skin. No one knew if they would survive. Clint later said that in that moment, he didn't think of any movie, any future, or even his family. He thought only of breathing. As the plane sank, he was forced to open the hatch, jump into the pitch-black water, and start swimming. Swimming in the freezing dark, swimming against crashing waves, swimming without knowing which direction led to land. It's estimated he swam more than 3 kilometers, a distance many healthy people can't complete even on land. But Clint survived. Not because of strength, but because of the instinct of a man with nothing left to lose. This incident became the root of the Eastwood demeanor. The unflinching eyes, the low voice, the silence heavy as stone, and above all, composure in chaos. He once said, "I've known what it's like to stand face to face with death. After that, nothing scares me." After the crash, Clint was officially drafted, but destiny sent him to Fort Ord, not to the battlefield, but to become a swimming instructor. Every morning, he stood on the Monterey shoreline, watching young soldiers train in the cold water. He taught them how to breathe, how to keep rhythm, how not to let fear consume them. No one knew that these were the very lessons he had used to save himself from the cold sea just months earlier. Yet even though the military discipline toughened him, Clint never fit in. He felt different. Not part of the lively groups in the barracks. Not wanting to grow too close to anyone. When he left the service, Clint returned with empty hands and no plans. He went back to the jobs that had once sustained him as a teenager. Washing dishes in diners, hauling goods in warehouses, tending boilers in factories, doing anything that paid the rent. Some nights, he slept on cold wooden floors, his body aching, but still feeling a strange peace, because at least no one expected him to speak. Then a small opportunity appeared. A casting manager noticed Clint while he was working part-time at a club. Tall, angular-faced, with deep, somber eyes. In 1954, he was introduced to Universal Pictures and signed a trainee contract. Back then, Clint knew nothing about acting. He spoke little, moved little, and that very restraint made people curious. But just a few months later, Clint was fired. The reason recorded was brutally harsh. Wooden acting, poor line delivery, no future. Those words stayed with him for years, a cold reminder that he had never been good enough for anyone's expectations. From 1955 to 1959, Clint continued taking small, nameless roles, sometimes without dialogue, sometimes just a figure passing across the screen. A weekly salary of $75, not enough to live decently in California. But he kept going for a simple reason. He had nowhere else to go. Long shooting days, repetitive scenes, blunt critiques, all of it made Clint withdraw further, clinging to silence the way he had since childhood. During this time, he married Maggie Johnson, a gentle, soft-spoken woman. But her kindness was not enough to fill the empty spaces inside Clint. Their marriage began with hope, but it was built on unstable ground. A young man afraid of abandonment, yet unsure how to keep anyone close. Clint loved instinctively, but kept his distance out of habit. This became a crack that stretched across decades, repeating itself in many relationships where Clint could never truly find peace. The 1950s closed on Clint's back with the exhaustion of a survivor. He had all the traits of a star, looks, height, presence, yet was criticized as emotionless, unskilled, without potential. He did everything to stay afloat, but no one actually saw him. And it was this period of being underestimated that became priceless material for his later roles. Men who are quiet, solitary, and never say everything they've lived through. Before Clint stepped into the 1960s, the decade that would define his immortal identity, he had already endured the harshest years of his life. A near-fatal accident, grueling jobs, a career dismissed at its first doorway, and a heart carrying the fear of abandonment rooted in childhood. But from those ruins, the man named Clint Eastwood truly began to take shape. And destiny was waiting for him ahead, in a place far from Hollywood, Italy. The 1960s began with Clint Eastwood still struggling in Hollywood with forgettable roles, nameless characters, no dialogue, no one remembering them. But sometimes, destiny enters a person's life as quietly as they themselves are. For Clint, that destiny was called Rawhide. In 1959, when his career seemed to be hitting bottom, Clint was cast as Rowdy Yates in Rawhide, no one thought it would be a major breakthrough. For many actors, television was just a side road when cinema rejected them. But for Clint, Rawhide was the first time he was seen clearly on camera. Tall, laconic, sharp-eyed, and carrying the natural hardness of the West in his face. Over 7 years, from 1959 to 1965, Rawhide aired 217 episodes, bringing Clint to millions of American households. Yet he still felt confined in a tight costume. A young cowboy, hot-headed and shallow, far from the quiet man inside. And then, in a sudden turn, Clint's name caught the attention of Italian director Sergio Leone. Leone was looking for a new face for his Italian-style Western, a genre Hollywood still dismissed. He didn't need a star. He needed a face capable of telling a story without speaking. When he saw Clint in Rawhide, Leone knew he'd found exactly that. In 1964, Clint traveled to Italy to film A Fistful of Dollars. It was a risky choice. Hollywood mocked European Westerns, calling them cheap films. But Clint liked the risk. He packed a few clothes and brought along an old poncho and cigars, two things that would later become immortal symbols. On the red dust set of Almeria, under the burning Spanish sun, Clint realized he was doing something unprecedented, creating an entirely new kind of hero. His character, the man with no name, spoke almost not at all. The role came with one particular requirement. He had to constantly smoke cigars. The irony was that Clint hated cigars. He hated the smell, the taste, and the numbing sting after dozens of cheap ones each day. But he smoked them anyway, quietly, without complaint, because he understood. The cigar wasn't for smoking. It was part of the character. It made the man's face unreadable, his stare sharper and colder. Those moments when Clint lifted the cigar from one corner of his mouth to the other, saying nothing, only narrowing his eyes at an opponent, those were the moments that rewrote Western cinema history. Leone once joked, "Clint only has two expressions, with a hat and without a hat." But then he said the line Hollywood would take years to understand. Clint acts with silence, something most actors don't know how to use. Fistful was an unexpected success, but for a few dollars more, 1965, and especially The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966, turned Clint into a global icon. Red dust, prairie winds, the harmonica echoing in silence, and Clint's icy face appearing as if he weren't playing a cowboy, but living in that harsh world for real. What drew audiences wasn't perfection. It was mystery. What had this man lived through for his eyes to look like they carried untold stories? No one knew. And that not knowing became a cinematic fever. Few people know Clint performed almost all his stunt scenes himself. He disliked stunt doubles. Not out of pride, but because he believed his eyes, the very eyes that defined his persona, were irreplaceable. In one scene involving a downhill horseback run, safety staff insisted on using a double, but Clint simply said, "He doesn't have my eyes." A simple line, but it revealed how clearly he understood the source of his power. Truth. His success in Italy brought him back to Hollywood with an entirely new status. By 1971, he was invited to play Inspector Harry Callahan in Dirty Harry, a role that would become his second monumental milestone. Harry Callahan was the new era hero, tough, unyielding, sometimes brutal, yet carrying an unreachable loneliness inside. But upon writing the script, Clint asked to cut almost half of the dialogue. He said, "Harry Callahan doesn't explain himself. He acts." It was a role only Clint could truly embody. A man wrapped in silence, using coldness to hide emotional wounds. And audiences realized that coldness wasn't acting. It came from real life. When the film premiered, it exploded at the box office. Over $36 million in the US, a staggering figure for the time, making Clint one of the decade's top stars. But more importantly, its cultural impact was enormous. Dirty Harry became a character archetype quoted, referenced, and recreated in countless films, comics, and TV series for decades. The legendary line, "Do you feel lucky, punk?" became one of the most iconic moments in American cinema history. A lesser-known behind-the-scenes detail: Clint never rewatched his own films, not even the famous spaghetti westerns. He believed rewatching would make him overcorrect and lose natural instinct. "When the film is done," he said, "it belongs to the audience." Perhaps that is why his characters always feel alive. Because Clint never tried to perfect anything. He simply showed up quietly, letting emotions pass through him like wind across the prairie. From the years of being underestimated in Hollywood, from the near-fatal plane crash, from a childhood without any place to call home, from a father who always stood too far. Everything that once hurt Clint became light on the screen, not the dazzling light of other stars, but a persistent, steel-cold glow. The years 1960–1971 were not only a period of success. They were the years when Clint Eastwood's silence became his own language. A language that carried him from $75-a-week roles to global cinematic icon. Hollywood has never had anyone like him, and it never will again. As the 1970s closed the first great chapter of his career, Clint was about to step into the most defining phase of his life, where the spotlight would collide with the deepest cracks in his soul. The 1970s lifted Clint Eastwood to the very peak of Hollywood. Dirty Harry turned him into the embodiment of toughness, integrity, a hero who could stare down darkness without needing anyone behind him. But precisely when the light was brightest, the cracks inside him began to show. Deeper, quieter, and harder to heal than any gun he had ever held on screen. On film, Clint was the man who delivered justice to the vulnerable. But off-screen, he was drawn into another world entirely. A world of overlapping relationships, unnamed secrets, and romances that never stood still. He spoke little, explained even less, and that made everything more mysterious. The press began asking, "Who is Clint Eastwood when the camera stops rolling?" For decades, Clint had relationships with many women, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes overlapping, sometimes in ways no one fully understood except him. Children appeared throughout his life, some only discovering Clint Eastwood was their father after they were grown. It is estimated he has at least 8 to 9 children with 6 different women. That number isn't meant as a judgment, but as proof that Clint's life was never a straight line. It was more like a long crack. The closer you looked, the more branching lines you saw spreading into the dark. Among all these turbulent relationships, his romance with actress Sandra Locke was the most chaotic chapter, lasting from 1975 to 1989. They met while filming The Outlaw Josie Wales, and immediately fell into each other like two magnetic fragments that were powerful together but could never fit perfectly. Sandra was sensitive, easily wounded. Clint was guarded, closed off, always keeping a small distance between himself and anyone who tried to get close. Their love was passionate, fierce, but controlling, jealous, and filled with conflicts that were never truly resolved. They lived together, but never truly belonged to each other. They made films together, but never looked toward the same horizon. And the more they loved, the more deeply they hurt each other. The final years of the relationship were chaos, slammed doors, words that cut open wounds, silences so heavy that Sandra sometimes felt she was living with a stranger. She once said, "I never knew what Clint was thinking, and that's what scared me the most." Clint, as always, gave no response. When they split in 1989, the breakup didn't happen quietly. It exploded, leading to 2 lawsuits that lasted nearly a decade. Locke sued Clint, then sued Warner Brothers. The transformation from lovers to adversaries shocked American media. Every newspaper wanted to know what had happened behind Eastwood's closed doors. Accusations, legal documents, emotional wounds spilled into the public eye, and the strong hero image he carried on screen was yanked down from its pedestal. But the striking thing is, Clint still said nothing. He didn't respond to the press. He didn't explain. He didn't do interviews. He didn't deny or defend. Silence, once his style, now became his shield. People saw only a man growing more withdrawn, more closed off, as if every headline was another bell tolling for a deeper crack within him. Clint was not the type to create scandal for attention. He was the type who let scandal blow past, like wind over a desert, slow, draining, but revealing nothing inside. And here, the greatest contradiction of his life became clear. On screen, he was the man who protected the weak, fought evil, stood for justice. Off screen, he was seen as unreadable, cold, and hiding too much behind that somber gaze. Perhaps Clint Eastwood had always been 2 men. One the world could see, strong, righteous, unyielding, and one he kept only for himself. Vulnerable, carrying childhood abandonment scars, never finding a place that truly felt like home. From the 1970s to the 1990s, those cracks never healed. They were covered by fame, by successful films, by celebrated awards. But Hollywood's light was never strong enough to mend what had broken on the inside. It only made the fractures clearer when you looked closely. And Clint, the man of silence, withdrew further the more he was hurt. He let silence speak for him, a silence so powerful people couldn't tell whether it was strength or despair. The 1990s closed with Clint turning 60, no longer the lone cowboy standing in the middle of the prairie, but still a man carrying the same quiet fractures that no romance, no success, no Oscar could ever fully heal. And from those very cracks, he would step into the most important phase of his life. A phase where filmmaking would not just be work, but a way for him to rediscover himself, and at times, to save himself. When the 1990s began, Clint Eastwood stepped into his 60s carrying a life filled with cracks that had never been mended. Years of disputes, lawsuits that drained both spirit and reputation. All of it left hollows deeper than any bullet he had ever dodged on screen. But life has strange cycles. Sometimes what saves a person is not love, and certainly not fame, but the one thing they have quietly devoted their entire life to: art. Clint never saw himself as a naturally gifted director. He didn't attend film school, had no formal training. But perhaps it was precisely that lack of training that allowed him to keep the raw instinct of a storyteller. Quiet, observant, placing the camera exactly where the heart led him. And as his acting career moved past its brightest peak, Clint found his answer behind the camera, where he could finally say the things he had never spoken aloud. In 1992, he directed Unforgiven, a film many regard as a confession, a farewell, and a mirror held up to his own soul. William Money is a man who carries darkness with him, trying to bury his past, trying to live decently, but forever pulled back toward old wounds. When Clint stood in front of the camera as Money, it felt as if he wasn't acting anymore. He was simply breathing, simply silent, letting his past and his guilt echo through every crease of his face. Unforgiven was a monumental turning point. It earned Clint his first 2 Oscars, Best Director and Best Picture. But more importantly, it marked the first time he used cinema to speak of his own pain, with honesty, maturity, and without any need for defense. In the following years, Clint spent more time in the director's chair. He chose stories tinged with redemption, loneliness, and fragile humanity, themes he had carried with him all his life. A Perfect World, 1993, is the story of a lost man searching for the last trace of goodness within himself. The Bridges of Madison County, 1995, where he starred opposite Meryl Streep, was a rare moment of tenderness in his career. A late-blooming love so beautiful that one only dares to touch it once in a lifetime before tucking it away into memory. In that film, Clint played photographer Robert Kincaid, a man who had traveled the world yet found only one place where he felt truly seen: the heart of a woman named Francesca. Something in Clint's performance, in his stillness, made audiences believe this was no longer a role. It felt like a rare moment where he allowed himself to be vulnerable, something he had hidden his entire life. But cinema never allowed Clint to stay in gentleness for long. He returned to the darkness with Mystic River, 2003, a chilling story about loss, guilt, and childhood wounds that never heal. When directing the film, Clint seemed to understand deeply that every tragedy begins with something small, just like his own childhood marked by his father's silence, constant relocations, and the fear of abandonment that followed him for decades. And then, in 2004, Clint created what many call the saddest poem he ever made, $1 Million Baby. The film uses boxing as a backdrop, but truly speaks about loneliness, incomplete love, and the sorrow of people the world seems to forget. Clint's character, Frankie Dunn, is an aging, difficult man whose deepest wound is the loss of the daughter he never had the courage to hold on to. There is a moment in the film when Frankie whispers, "Always protect yourself," a line that feels as if it echoes directly from Clint's lifelong fears. Fear of loving, fear of losing, fear of letting someone step too close. When he stands in the dim light of the old gym, watching the one person he cares about slip away beyond his reach, audiences don't just see Frankie Dunn, they see Clint Eastwood himself, a man who has spent a lifetime hiding pain behind silence. $1 Million Baby earned him 2 more Oscars at the age of 74, an achievement rare in world cinema. But what Clint held on to was not the victory. It was the truth that art had become the last place where he could breathe, hurt, soften, and mend the broken pieces inside him. Clint never said he directed for salvation. But in every film he made, from Unforgiven to $1 Million Baby, people saw a clear journey. The journey of a man trying to heal himself through the stories he told. Not loudly, not explicitly, not defensively. Exactly the way he had always lived. When the 2000s ended, Clint entered age 75 with a directorial career revered across the world. But behind that brilliance remained an unfinished story. A story of silence, old wounds, and the legacy he was about to leave as age began settling on his shoulders like a fine layer of dust. And that was the moment his journey moved into its final chapter, where legacy, age, and stillness would merge into one. When stepping into the 2000s, Clint Eastwood was already a legend. But at the age when many choose to retire, he entered the golden autumn of his career, a period in which every film he made felt like a late afternoon beam touching the ground, imbued with calm, reflection, and weight. This was not merely old age. It was the stage where Clint looked back on his life, examined old wounds, and tried to place them inside the stories he told the world. After the success of Million Dollar Baby and Gran Torino, Clint returned to Carmel by the Sea, the coastal town where he had once served as mayor, as if returning to a quiet memory he had been searching for his entire life. His home sits near the ocean, surrounded by old oak trees. There, each morning, he brews a cup of coffee, opens the window to watch the fog drift across the grass hills, and sits alone for hours without needing to speak. People have seen him standing by the fence, silently watching sparrows land, a habit unchanged through time, observing the world before stepping into it. Gone were the chaotic romances and loud emotional wounds of his middle years. Clint chose to live his private life in absolute quiet. From around 2014, he began a relationship with Christina Sandera, a woman as quiet as he is, someone who did not love him for fame nor for glory, but for the peace he brought to late afternoons. They seldom appear in public, but those close to them say Clint has been calmer since living with Christina, a calm not loud or boastful, but like resting one's head on a shoulder after a lifetime of standing alone. At an age when many abandon their work, Clint continued directing. Not because he needed to prove anything, but because filmmaking had become the one thing that kept him connected to the world. In 2014, American Sniper became a box office earthquake, earning more than $540 million. The film stirred intense debate, receiving both praise and harsh criticism, but no one could deny Clint's boldness in confronting the pain of soldiers and asking the agonizing question: is a hero truly the one who returns home alive? At over 80, Clint no longer cared about pleasing anyone. He told the stories he believed needed to be told, even if they made others uncomfortable. In 2018, he returned to the screen with The Mule, playing a 90-year-old man transporting drugs to pay off debts. It wasn't a role meant to shine. It was a role meant to face himself. A tired old man who lived wrongly, loved wrongly, and tried to fix what had broken with one final, belated act. When he drives the old pickup truck at night, headlights illuminating the deeply lined face, audiences realize Clint Eastwood wasn't acting anymore. He was living a part of his real-life story. He continued making films into his 90s, still coming to set, still watching every camera angle, even as his steps slowed and his breath occasionally faltered. But that slowness wasn't weakness. It was the slowness of someone who understood that everything valuable takes time. In old age, Clint also opened his heart more to his children, something he had never done well in his younger years. The children who grew up in different places with different mothers now sat together at the same dinner table. Allison, Kyle, Francesca, all returned to Carmel during holidays, bringing small stories that made him chuckle softly, a rare but genuine smile that warmed anyone who saw it. Age softened Clint. He no longer hid, no longer avoided. and no longer needed to mask loneliness with hardness. His health remained surprisingly steady, a gift from a lifetime without hard liquor, without cigarettes, simple eating, and daily walking. But aging still showed itself. Slower eyes, slight tremors in his hands, short-term memory sometimes fading like sunlight behind the hills. It didn't sadden him. It simply made him move slower. A crew member once said, "He doesn't grow old the Hollywood way. He grows old the Clint Eastwood way, quietly, without asking anyone's permission." Throughout Clint Eastwood's career, people often cite his legacy in numbers. More than 70 films as an actor, over 40 films as a director, 4 Oscars, and a cinematic style that became a standard. But his true legacy is the image of a man standing alone beneath the twilight sky. Not perfect, not spotless, not a hero in the traditional sense, but a man who always dared to face his own cracks. And the most beautiful thing is, he never tried to fix all those cracks. He simply learned to live with them. Like a piece of pottery mended with gold, the more broken it is, the more beautiful it becomes. In his 90s, Clint lives slowly, speaks little, living like a long comma in the sentence of his own life. Yet whenever the name Clint Eastwood appears on screen, even just in the words "directed by," audiences still feel something strange. The presence of an old man, silent, standing behind every story. A man who has turned his entire career into a testament to loneliness and resilience. Clint Eastwood's life is not the journey of a flawless hero. It is the journey of an ordinary man, carrying mistakes, fractures, childhood fears, and choices he sometimes couldn't forgive himself for. But precisely because of that, his light never came from perfection. It came from the relentless effort to mend every broken piece, every silence. Every time he stood back up after things others believed he could never overcome. Nearly a century in film, when we look at what he achieved, these things did more than build a legend. They shaped the portrait of a man who chose to live true to his silence. A silence not meant to hide, but to face life without flinching. There are moments in his journey that explain why Clint became an icon. The way he stands alone on the prairie in the good, the bad, and the ugly. The half-defiant, half-weary glance in Dirty Harry. The humble, wordless bow in Unforgiven. The smile carrying a lifetime of regret in $1 Million Baby. And the lonely silhouette of an old man driving through the night in The Mule. These are not merely roles. They are fragments of his life woven into characters, as if each film were a small attempt to understand himself more deeply. And as he grows old, slows down, lives by the sea in foggy mornings, people recognize something Clint never said aloud. That sometimes the brightest light in one's life does not come from the glory years, but from the later years, when one is finally calm enough to look back without fear. Clint Eastwood is not a man of grand speeches. He is a man of long silences. Silences in which you can hear the wind, the ocean, and the heartbeat of someone who has lived long enough to know that true strength is not in the hands, but in the courage to face what once hurt you. Perhaps this is the final message he wants to leave behind, that every person has their cracks, and they are nothing to be ashamed of. Cracks let the light in. Cracks make us human. Cracks help us understand who we are. On screen, he is the man of justice. Off screen, he is the man of silence. But in both worlds, Clint Eastwood has never stopped moving. He simply chose to walk slowly and let the light slip through the things he spent a lifetime trying to hide. If Clint's journey reminds you of the strong but fractured people who have walked through your life, leave a small sign. Just one, enough for this story to keep whispering in the hearts of those who may need it. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic journeys into the lives behind the fame. This is Hollywood Biographies, the light, the silence, the legacy.